No, like, I guess it's not. Like, I see Medium as like being very specific to one type of content, and there aren't subscriptions, and the way it's monetized is typically tied just to ads. Is that correct? But these are like, you can like have different tiers, like Patreon style, of like levels of support. You can sort of like have paid and free content, and like that's all like set up and managed. And or you can set up like courses where you like sell modules to content and things like that, which it looks like Podia is a little more on that like online courses and membership side. But is that possible in Medium? I didn't think so, but I don't know.
No, it's, well, not really, not meaningfully. It sounds much more like Patreon, but with a web host framework, which is cool.
Yeah, and I think that the ones that are not Patreon offer a lot more versatility and like multi-currency and things like that.
Yeah, well, that's not even the biggest beef I would have with Patreon. So
what's your beef with Patreon? I mean, I struggle with all of these. I want to hear.
Well, it's challenging. I mean, so we actually had a reading session where I had this as one of the optionals, but like, do you know who Sexy Cyborg is?
Is that the she's like a maker in Wuhan? Oh no, not in Wuhan. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but you're close. So there was this weird thing. I can't remember which one of those New York. It's like not.
Yeah, she got like weirdly doxxed by that tech news reporter, right?
There was like, yeah, so there was kind of doxing going on there, and then like she sort of tried to retaliate. So there's something that she's like not saying publicly. I think like she's lesbian or something like that. But she doesn't say exactly what it is, but it's something that is much more dangerous to say out loud in China than it is to say here. And her work in general is like super feminist, and like there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of like she makes her body very Western sexy, but it means something different in China than it does here. And like she does it to have a feminist platform in which she can critique the government without being taken overly seriously. So she's kind of this fascinating individual. Anyway, I don't remember which web like slightly edgy tech publication came over and interviewed her, and she had these like conversations that were like, just to be clear, you cannot talk about this in your publication or I will be in mortal danger. And they went ahead and like did, or like were planning to, or something like that. And so then her version of retaliation to like try to stop this or something, I'm not sure exactly, it's been a while since I've read it, but like it was she found the address of the editor-in-chief, who is like a, like well-off, well-connected white guy in New York City. Kind of a different situation, but like doxing is still doxing, I guess. And what she did is in one of her maker videos, there was like a couple of seconds of snippet where she'd like made these brand new heels that had like persistence of vision or something in the heel part. And it displayed his address for a second in one of her videos. It didn't like say do something to this guy, but it was like definitely intended for him to notice it. And he did. And he knows people at Patreon, and they said, well, that's against our terms of service, so you're now banned. So then she stopped having a source of income. And it's just like this like crazy like culture clash, ethics, like everybody's doxing each other, but like different level. Anyway, like the fact that they were kind of just hearing his side and not hearing her side, they just like banned her with no recourse.
Yeah.
And then like the later when she got on one of those other like alternative crowdfunding platforms and then got banned off of there because they basically were shutting down, Sleeping Giants kind of shut down the platform, and she was kind of like just a casualty there because there was a lot of neo-Nazis also on that platform because it's the one that Patreon won't let post there. They accept everybody that Patreon won't. Anyway, that's kind of my beef with Patreon, is like failure to have nuance in their sort of terms of service for like, she's a major creator. Like she's not, I don't know, like I can see it when like if Twitter banned my account sort of by accident because a bunch of people reported something like wrongly or whatever. Like I would kind of get it that if they would ignore me for months, even though I don't love it. My account got hacked and they never got back to me as an example there. But she's not like as nobody as me, you know. Like she's a major creator and she's very influential, and like they should like give her a fair hearing, I feel. But I feel like they were kind of playing politics instead, and I don't know, like it is their private platform, and that's kind of the point that we have in these conversations is like, well, I guess it's your right to do whatever the hell you want. Like, yeah, you can ban people.
It's funny though, when you're creating platforms, you're creating like a commons space in a sense, you know? And like, yeah, sure, the fact that it's a digital commons means that it's hosted somewhere and that there's software behind it and all of this investment, private equity or otherwise, that goes into making that a possibility. But yeah, I think this is where like in general the nuance in the tech space around the ethics, or I guess the like the policy considerations of banning somebody from a commons or a commons-esque space. It seems like reading through a simple terms and conditions couldn't be enough to make that call, you know? Like and just following it by the letter, there should be more consideration around, especially like high profile situations. But I don't know. I mean,
yeah, like at a certain size, you kind of need a jury, right?
some sort of entity that's not just.
Yeah, isn't that what Twitch has done? Like they have this like whole advisory panel because I think their application of how people get banned has been always really intense and like kind of difficult to adjudicate. And like they'll hand down like a ban on when like a stream is still going, right? So it's like it's so real time and dynamic. And then there have been so much pushback from the community that they announced that community advisory panel, which was also then like beset with all of the same critiques around how they handle banning. But that actually seemed like an attempt to actually engage with some of those things that you mentioned, Stefan, was like thinking about this as like not just a space that like the company administers, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just to check in on time and stuff. I guess if there's only 3 of us, our plans for this call won't work. And I wonder if at some point we just want to have a brief chat about the readings, or do we want to like postpone it and see if we have luck again? Like, what are people feeling? I mean, I guess it was a risk, and apologies for my scheduling, but that people wouldn't show up because it is the day that it is. I don't know why I feel like adverse even saying it out loud.
I don't know. So we've had low attendance for the last several. Like Jonathan and I rescheduled a couple times, and we got us 2 and 1 other person, and we actually had a great conversation. But I don't know. I guess there's a conversation that should be had at some point about like data together as a group. I find a lot of value here, and I feel like I interact with a lot of different people who are also passionate about the issues when we have the sessions. But I don't know. Like I wonder to what extent I'm not reading the room on this, because like it is a lot of work to make the reading list and then to execute on it and like to show up and have the conversation. And I don't want to be holding a space for people to work hard and then be disappointed when nobody shows up.
I mean, I think it's just like 2020 is like a year.
I'll jump in 1 second here. I just have a little guy who just briefly is interrupting me.
No worries. No, but yeah, Kelsey, I feel similarly. It's been a valuable space. I think for me personally, 2020 has just been like, blah! So I don't even feel like I've been able, like I've come to half of the sessions, but I've missed a bunch of other ones. and that is not a reflection of like my desire. It's like just a reflection of like trying to like survive.
Yeah,
People are going through.
I also, because this is the first session I've been in all year. Like I think I was in one late last year, and uh, the like Kelsey knows because we met up with her in Seattle briefly last fall or like last December or something. So she knows what we were doing right before the pandemic hit. We were driving around in a truck camper as a family of four, like house sitting and like, like totally like lumpen proletariat almost at various points. As a family of four, that was a bit intense, right? And then the pandemic hit and it was like our house sitting gigs dried up because nobody was flying anymore. And we suddenly had to like figure out how to shelter in place, which meant having to return to the model of housing called renting, which we had made like a stern commitment that we weren't going to return to that unless it was leasing a chunk of land on somebody's farm and putting our built tiny home on it. We couldn't go back and build the tiny home in the because the US, that's where it was, and we just couldn't get over the border anymore. So suddenly we found ourselves like having to rent and having to make more income as a result to like pay for the rent. Um, and everything just has been so busy since then. Like it's just been like looking for contracts or like testing product ideas online and running training and just going. And it's great from like, oh yay, the business has like really gotten started. But in terms of my ability to participate in other things, it's just like everything just completely exploded. um, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I think the question that there's a question here, Kelsey, for you and your group around like, and it's aptly related to this question of polity. It's like, how do we foster and sustain like active and engaged communities of practice in a time when there's so much uncertainty and strangely like busyness. Like it seems silly that we should be this busy, but everybody just seems so busy, and it's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
You've had a crazier than everybody year. Dang, I didn't even remember. Like,
It was crazy. Like the first 4 months of this year were just like just nuts.
yeah.
Yeah, the busyness thing really resonates. Like I'm somehow doing about the same or significantly less in terms of like number of commitments, but the amount of like weird busyness around them is like intense. And it feels hard to be like present in those spaces as like a community or something, despite like being like an active participant in them for even like maybe more hours or at least the same. I feel like I'm like less there, which is funny because like this group always was distributed and online, so I'm not sure why that feels. I feel a bit more removed from it now, but I do.
No, it's really real though. Also, Edgy, well, not all of Edgy, but a big chunk of Edgy, including me, picked up like a big new project. And you know how, Don, you know how normally Edgy kind of shuts down over the summer? Instead, we accelerated and we just had a huge launch of a project we've been working on since like January. And, this we took last week off, which was a great idea. I can't believe we actually managed to cancel. We were having 2 hour-and-a-half meetings a week and we canceled both of them last week. It was amazing. But we're back now. Had a meeting this morning and we got another one on Thursday to try to figure out like what we're doing next in this project space. And it's a really good project, and I'm worried that if we don't continue it, like people will drop off. But I also don't want to keep it going because people are burning out.
Yeah, hey, we talked a little bit about this, about like anti-productive spaces and like meeting spaces. Or Stephanie and I did when we were preparing for this call, but that has come up in a lot of other groups I'm a part of too, is like, how do we like be together but like rescale the amount of work we're doing? Or have the like process or the act of meeting be like part of the work, like Michelle has mentioned that in the context of the Techno Science Research Unit, which resonates with me. But I really am, I don't know, I also do have a lot of work I'm supposed to be doing. So it's a bit of a like, I can't do no work. I have to figure out how to like do only the right amount of work. But I am not there yet.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we can slow this down. Like I know that some people don't show up at these data together sessions because they're like, well, I didn't have time to do the readings and I don't want to show up every time having not done the readings. And I get it. And it's legit, and like having done this a bunch, curating the readings is amazingly hard and time consuming. Um, we're doing okay with Edgy did a pretty good session of, we did an anti-racism training. We got like a good dozen people through it, with like an outside consultancy this summer, which was really cool. And we even have this follow on, like part of every other all Edgy meeting now is devoted to like in meeting anti-racism workshop for everybody. And one of the specific elements of it is that there's no pre-work. Like if we're reading something, it's something we're going to read during that time. Um, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could pick that up here.
So when you were saying like what to do, I was gonna suggest my my partner and I, we used to run this thing called the Wayward School ages ago. And it was like skill and knowledge sharing events distributed around the city of Victoria in spaces that, were, I don't know, like underutilized. So we would use business, like weird closed down businesses and warehouse spaces and backyards and all of this. Um, but one of the formats that we experimented, because it was like we were running like seasons of programming around a theme. Like the first one was home economics, and it would just be anything that we could find within our community. So if there's anybody who wanted to teach something, we created the platform for them to come in and do it. And one of the things that we did was we had this thing called the Out Loud Reading Group, which was like very open, like you don't have to read anything to come to this reading group because we're gonna read it out loud here. And we would pick just one text that was like really, you know, juicy, uh, foundational, and some, just there's a lot to it. And we would literally just pass that text around the table, and we would get like 20 people from the community at these things, just passing around this printout of this essay or whatever it is, right? And we would make our way through like 4 paragraphs because it's like every time somebody would start reading, it's like, yes, no. So, anyways, what this makes me think about is da 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 da, and then that would lead to a bit of a conversation, and then kind of turn to the next person. They'd read like a couple of lines and then stop and go, yeah, and then this and this and this. I mean, it was a really interesting way, and it required no advanced reading, but you could, if you wanted to, you could read it in advance. So the option was always there if you wanted to digest the whole thing before you came, but you didn't have to.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
There was a that reminds me of, well, like a couple things, but there was, I guess it's not going right now, a standing event here called Choir Choir Choir, where you would like go and learn a song to sing aloud, like as a group choral activity. And so you would like show up. I don't think they always announce the song in advance, but sometimes you would know. But you would not, like all the prep and like getting ready to sing together would like happen there. Like you would pick up a sheet with the lyrics, like walk through it as an exercise together, and by the end have like accomplished something. But that didn't require like that work in advance. But also the other thing that reminds me of this, which actually works and I really love it, is in a few organizations I'm a part of, but like probably the largest one that does this is one of the unions I'm a member of as a grad student worker is QP 3902, and they read their like anti-oppression kind of like positionality statement as a group by like passing off paragraph to paragraph around the room before every meeting, which I think is really lovely as a gesture.
I wonder if it would make sense to try to, like, I don't want to let data together drop. I want to have another semester of it next year. And by semester, I mean the whole year eventually. So I'm wondering if maybe that's a good way to do it, is just have, you know, like people volunteer to bring a piece that feels appropriate that we all kind of read in the space. And then, and I really liked, Stefan, what you were talking about with people just feeling comfortable pausing and saying, I want to discuss this. Because that's, you know, for me, I love the variety of people that come to Data Together and the backgrounds they come from. And that's a huge part of, you know, the readings are great, but parsing it with other people is what really unlocks them.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, there's so many fun formats to do with it as well too. Like there's another exercise that I really quite like called narrative reauthoring, which is a little more out there, but you can have an interesting conversation stem from material um, using that, and that's it's. Anyways, I know all of these different formats and tools and everything because this is what I teach all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm more than happy to like help share ideas around format. And I thought like even coming back to what Don was saying, either in terms of like what do we do for this call right now, I think this conversation is a good part of that. And then maybe we experiment or have a feel for one of the structures that we can actually do the three of us right now if we want to, and then from that get a sense of like at least some measure of differentiation. I mean, we've done like everybody here has done facilitated things with people, so that's like fairly common. But we could do one. We could do the spiral journal if we wanted to right now. We could do narrative reauthoring if you guys wanted to, but they're more reflexive. They're more slowing down. If we had a bigger group, we could do like, you know, some of these other breakouty ones and then get a different feeling from each. Because the thing that I find with gatherings of people, like whether they're coming together for like a very tight purpose, like they all understand this is like we all work together, we're all fairly interdependent in our work, versus a group of people more like Data Together, where it's like we're loosely held together by an interest in the topic and an interest in the conversations and the community that gets created around that conversation. Um, in both of those instances, there's like ways uh, to leverage purpose in different ways. You know what I mean? And one thing that I'm kind of curious about, Kelsey, is like for Data Together, and maybe this is just me being like unfamiliar with the space, for Data Together and Edgy, is there like a overlap, or is it like are they two completely different things in terms of like folks who come to Data Together, are they also part of Edgy, or like how does that mixture work?
Yeah, well, I think, Dawn, is this your brainchild originally? I feel like I took it over from you. I assume you originated it.
Yeah, but I would say I don't actually totally know the answer anymore. So when it started, it was like it grew out of probably like mostly edgy facilitator like energy, and at the time I was doing most of that. That would have been like 3 years ago, and kind of like an active engagement that also involved software development and like a lot of time and energy with query and protocol labs. So it was imagined as a tri partnership. I don't know how to say that, a partnership. And we had imagined always kind of like splitting that like uh, some of that coordinating work and sort of tried to set up a very loose governance approach around that, and then plan to have like an annual meeting once a year to check in on the various things that were going on. The first year was like really yeah, it was like around multiple different channels, and then by the second year that kind of really focused in on what I would say were Edgy's strengths, which were kind of like creating this as a space for a certain type of conversation that wasn't happening, I think, totally within Edgy otherwise, but it drew a lot from conversations that Edgy has facilitated. And then also that weren't, I guess, maybe weren't happening around protocol labs and query at the time. But yeah, like I don't actually know if I have a strong handle on how it feels like things are now, or how much this feels like it overlaps with Edgy. I would sort of turn that to Kelsey to answer.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting because it has this history, right? Like Don was saying, of intending to be a technical challenge that people take on together. And even through last year, we were having an in-person annual meeting, and we had representatives from Protocol Labs and Query, and we would generally have somebody from Protocol Labs and Query and Edgy at every session. Although I kind of took over the coordinating, which Don had been basically handling. I think Kevin had a stint in there where he was doing a lot of the coordinating too. And now it's sort of odd because over the same time period, like Edgy originally started as a big data saving archiving operation, and it hasn't been that for multiple years, basically 2 since I was hired to coordinate it. And hired to coordinate the archiving specifically, which we don't do. But we're in this really interesting space where, like, I feel like a big part of the original intention was to have a more ethical and more citizen controlled way to be saving data than we had. And it spun into this much more theoretical discussion because, like, Brendan actually made Query, my understanding is kind of based on the data together conversations. Query is like a decentralized data set software company that he started. And then like IPFS, they're very engaged with us, like sometimes, and other times not. Like when they just did their Filecoin big launch in September, they reached out to me and they're like, hey, we're ready for your data. All that data you have, we want to put it on the DWeb. And I unfortunately had to respond to that with like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm very busy and I don't know where the data is. I actually got to reach out to them this week and be like, hey, so I'm ready now. That's the dream we had originally, so that would be cool if we could say yes to it. But it's sort of strange because, like, Rob, who hasn't been in a lot of these recent meetings. I'm not sure if you've been in a crossover with him, Stefan, Stephen. Gosh, reading your name is very hard for me. But like he still very much cares about these principles, and he's very active at Edgy still. He's one of the few folks who's like had this very consistent through line since like Trump's election, basically at Edgy, where he does this exact type of data work. Anyway, I've sort of felt like this is a space where like Edgy comes in with this very strong environmental data justice angle and holds space for other people to come in and bring their perspectives. So we have folks like you, Stephen, working on like, and Dawn actually working on like kind of understanding collectivist spaces and like having these really strong like experiences in community organizing. We have people coming in from citizen science backgrounds. We have people coming in who maybe have no like real background in justice issues or community organizing at all, who are building protocols, and they've maybe never had a time or space to think about, like, if I make this technical decision, how does that play out in terms of who's able to use it and how they're able to use it. And it's this really cool, like, intersection when it works, which I feel like it honestly often does. But I can't say, I mean, to directly answer your question, I can't say that there's a lot of overlap with Edgy, because kind of we don't do that anymore. It's just me, but I'm still, I mean, I work for Edgy, and I'm still sort of holding that space at Edgy too when we have data conversations. Like, I'm the technical one in the room usually, saying, hey, well, we should consider doing it this way. We should be present in these spaces. And I feel like a representative in a lot of the technical, like, conferences outside of the Edgy sphere, and say, hey, I'm coming from this totally other, like, I have a real use case for data decentralization, which isn't often the case in data decentralization, like, nerd meetups.
Which I still find so intensely interesting.
I know.
Like that, you know, a few years in, that this still is maybe a really strong use case. Though I think something like, say, Starling, the Starling project, I don't know if you've spoken to Jonathan Dotan. He'd be a good person to actually invite to some sort of Data Together event next year. They do art. It's actually similarly, like, you know, thinking about needing to archive important is like witness testimony. It's testimony related to, I think, Holocaust survivors exclusively, but it's sort of like things that were recorded with the intent of being publicly available from now and into the future. Thinking about these questions of, like, trust and holding this sort of data, but something that also is like a global, or like has this resonance in so many important communities, like a very strong, like, orientation towards justice. A little bit of a different, like, it's not the environmental justice angle in the same way. It's more like this, like, human rights and, like, witnessing emphasis. But, you know, it's like very resonant, and they have a really strong use case, and they've done some, like, testing and working with IPFS folks. And actually, Ben from Haifa, like the worker co-op I'm a member of, also has worked with them. And they did a launch this year. Like, so there are some of these use cases, but where there aren't like a huge amount of them. There's like a lot of, like, interesting apps that are being built, but there isn't totally these, like, kind of fully, like, thickened, like, rich contexts where, like, this is how this, like, you know, this is a space to think about the implications of this and how it's used, and, like, understand how we should think about building this out, you know, into future phases. I mean, for what it's worth, I feel like I think there could be another season or another term. I don't know what the right phrase is, but, like, definitely, like, maybe a reimagined version of it.
Can I I'm gonna suggest I'll do like a mild intervention in this moment here. If you'll allow me, I'd like to interrogate the two of you using 9 whys, which is another helpful liberating structure. And maybe we can get at why Data Together, get to kind of some, like, bedrock material for why Data Together. So, like, I heard a lot of context there that was super helpful in kind of understanding the overlap of these different spaces, and kind of also early intentions and early intentions that were held by Dawn and then passed on to Kelsey. And I feel like getting at your guys' shared why would be really helpful for whoever watches this recording. And then we could also leap off of that and into Spiral Journal to have, like, a reflective closeout on. So how do you, any objections to that proposal for the remainder of our meeting?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Always good to have a facilitator in the room.
So, so yeah, let's start. Why Data Together? Why the purpose around data together?
I feel like Kelsey should go first.
The very basic thing for me is that I really like it. I feel like the most intellectually stimulated in this space that I get to be, because I'm talking to all these people who are working on really real things, and have all of this theoretical background, and it's perspectives that I haven't heard, and I can watch them hear perspectives that they've never heard, and it's kind of amazing. Kind of just like unlocks and shifts concepts in my head, and I can feel it happening and during these conversations.
Yeah, I guess again, I'll speak for me as well. I think it's actually not too dissimilar of a reason why Data Together for me was that it felt like there was a gap between at the time the way we were trying to use these technologies and like decentralizing and peer technologies. And like kind of like the promise we could see in these technologies and like the like rich and careful and like nuanced like ways that we that and from an edgy side we're like uh, thinking about uh, justice around data and so I think it was like a bit for me like a way to like have conversations that helped demystify the technology or like do like kind of remove some of that allure of the technology um, from folks who maybe don't build it as much, and then also have the people who build it like have that connection into understanding some of these like kind of which I think are like very important kind of like framings or approaches or like critical understandings that like um, inform action. So it's kind of like a way to have disparate uh, expertises like meet and commingle.
Okay, I hear similarity, but also some interesting difference there, or at least like additional concepts, like this notion that there's a gap that's being filled, that Don mentioned, and then Kelsey, I think a lot of what you said around just this like diverse group of folk coming together to think together about these questions. There's a lot in line there with what Don was just saying, I think. So why is that important?
It's one of the things where, like, I think this technology is like interesting enough that it's going to get built, and I'm afraid that it's going to be built without all of the perspectives that it needs. And one of the things that makes the space cool is that a lot of the people in it, a lot of the base technologists even, are dreaming the same dreams that I am in terms of what our society can be, if we treat each other differently, if we hold things differently. And there's this deep interest that's held in having this, like, this other world made possible, to borrow language, um, by technology. But there's also, I mean, Don had this exactly right, and I was, this has been in my head too. There is this big gap where, like, they want the right things, but they don't have all the people who need to be in the room to make those things happen. We don't have all the people in our room either, but we try to bring it in at least through text.
Yeah, I would say probably it feels very similar to me. I think it's important because if these technologies are to meet the potential that I think the creators desire for them and the users and those who are like in this decentralized and peer-to-peer space like want, they I worry that they won't do it if it happens through like tech as usual being built, which either through like say Silicon Valley style or even the existing norms and paradigms in open source and open culture, I think are insufficient. And there are kind of a rich array of other ways of imagining otherwise and alternatives that have existed for a long time, but also are being actively enacted in grassroots movements, activist spaces, and that tie into areas in academia that are not often in conversation with like the technical, if that makes sense. So for me, it's about like trying to attach those conversations. And I think like you see certain ones get attached and are in vogue, like say something like digital commons. Like I think like commons now has like occupies that is like an imaginary sort of like is present enough that I think it is engaged with. But like to me, it's like what about things like abolition and abolitionist like tools or like data sovereignty, like drawing from like indigenous like sovereignty and that as like an understanding, or like anti-colonial and decolonial like ways of thinking, or sort of like just transition or more of like a transformation approach, which like can draw from sustainability and like just sustainability, I guess, spaces. Like there's just so many of those that I think offer something really rewarding. And I would like to see those ideas circulate.
Why is this important?
I think there's a lot of, I mean, I know there's a lot of historical reasons why these perspectives aren't in the room. And I think that there's a lot of varied history to the internet that we have, but the people building it are not fundamentally that different. Like building our new internet are not fundamentally that different from the people who built the other one. I think this is kind of the difference between not racist and anti-racist, right? Like you have to do a lot of conscious work if you're looking to actually address and not have inequity in a system that starts not equitable. So I think that that's sort of the concern with kind of just like letting that gap exist, or letting the people who are build it decide what to do. There's even really small things about open source where like there's the what gets measured gets managed, but then there's also like this, I've been an engineer in a room full of engineers who are certain that nothing matters but the engineering, and that company failed because we never hired a marketing person. And like there's a lot of that sentiment in open source, and there's this beautiful feeling that anyone could contribute, but that has to be anyone who's able to make a GitHub commit in the source code, and that is really a small anyone. You can't even have a designer say, hey, this should look like this, and then do it. You're still reliant on the people who write the code, and the people who write the code we already know is a pretty small demographic that has a lot of skew in it. And if that's who builds it, especially if they build it open source, they're going to build it around what they want and what they need and what their passions are, unless they have a really good reason not to.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it again feels very similar. My answer about why these things are important is like I think we're at a moment, we're at multiple moments of pressing need, and I think that like there this sort of where it feels like there's no going back to normal in those domains is like very apparent. And so I think about how like to take that seriously, we have to like rethink like the modes, the ways that we produce like knowledge, or the ways that we produce these systems, the ways that we produce these technologies. And I think a lot about how to build these technologies, which I think are an attempt, maybe like a parallel attempt to others, to actually think about a pluralistic future we could live in. We have to build in ways that escape that sort of like a techno-determinist kind of like, or like way that like mystifies them as technology. And it's like I don't think we can do that with the existing tools. So we have to like do that horrible, like messy process of like work with the tools we've got, which kind of suck, and build new tools at the same time that we're trying to like make this new world that we want. But we have to try. I don't know. Or like, what's the alternative is not trying, and I'm not prepared to do that yet.
I'm gonna ask you why, Don, and you go first this time. Why all of what you said? No, going back, we have to rethink the ways we reproduce knowledges and technologies to build a pluralistic future away from techno-determinism.
Why is that important?
Why?
I think we have at this point like heartbreaking and overly documented evidence of the damage that these systems have caused. And I and like that harm, you know, and I think that the like I don't know if the way out is to abandon everything. Like I don't think we can just like critique our way out of this situation. I think what we've developed is like an extremely robust set of ways to critique these systems, or at least certain areas of academia have that I like draw from, and I am super indebted to those as like ways of seeing. But I am committed to like also thinking about how to uh, make it so those critiques don't have to be used, because we aren't in that world anymore. And I think so. My why would be like that rethinking is the way I think we get out of it.
I have a sort of personal dichotomy that I've probably mentioned in this group before, but this idea of work to change the world, I use the dichotomy of sort of frontliners and utopians. And you really do need both. You need people fighting, like actively engaged with the world as it is and seeking change, like saying, hey, something else is better and we should work for it and we should have it. And then there's also this other set of people, the utopians are in the space of saying, hey, I think that we can try, like, let's start with the world we want. Like, let's make an assumption that it is possible. How do we live it right now, and how do we iterate on those systems so that there is something specific that is proven that we're aiming for? And I'm much more of a utopian, and I think that, like what Don was saying about rethinking the technologies that are imperfect and having to use them while we rebuild, that's exactly that. That's saying like, okay, if this were perfect, what would it be? And how do we get to that as soon as we possibly can? How can we actually live our values? Yeah.
Okay. Didn't finish that note, but I'm gonna put it in there anyways. So I think like we're getting deeper into some layers here. There's a lot going on around avoiding the damages and harm caused by the previous system, but also being trapped in this funny dichotomy where we have to use those same tools from the previous system to rebuild the new one. And then this interesting notion of the front lines and the utopians. And I think there's a lot of fruitful play space in these ideas here. Like we could stop here and build out a future present scenario, but I want to go a little deeper. So so like, why data together in the context of all of these things? Why data together? There's 9 whys actually. We won't go that far. We won't go that far. But we will go.
I can try going first if you'd like, Kelsey. Not that I actually have like a good answer. I guess I just think that data together is, I mean, I think it started as a place where there was like a confluence of those things meeting, right? Like it was like we were like building the bridge 2 steps in front of us. We were like doing like 8 other things, and we were like trying to grapple with what it all meant. And so like data together was like us being like, what, like, this is the space that we're in. Basically, that's how it started. And we were like, we need to like, we're like building this tech. We need a place to understand like how we built it. Like, I mean, there's these dusty GitHub repos kicking around. There's like, and then there was the like, oh, like we're realizing that like even how we think about what could at face value appear to be pretty innocuous concepts like data is not innocuous at all, right? And there's so much to unpack there that is like a rich and fruitful conversation. So we need to have like those conversations too. And then also it was like a way to think, like to be in that shared space together and think about kind of like, or like think and do together maybe as well, I'll say.
Now my frame kind of zoomed out a bit back to why data together, but why all of these things that have been discussed so far in relationship to this entity, Kelsey? I think Dawn, you're getting at it, like you brought it down, but why is this important? Why does this matter? Why?
I mean, that confluence word is kind of at the crux of it, right? There are all these amazing concepts, and like there's nothing new in philosophy, you know? Like, I don't know, I read the biography of Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote The Rights of Women and like decided to go be a war journalist at the French Revolution, and like she was like deeply anti-marriage and like all this other shit that you just really aren't allowed to be at that time, and you're like still not really, and like nothing is new, right? Like somebody was already living this kind of crazy radical future way back then, and I like love to think about her in that context. So I don't think we're going to be like, I don't think we're going to be inventing something here, but I think that in our modern context, we have to find the ideas that we need in the moment. And I think that that's not available, especially in technology spaces. There's like people who do a lot of tech spend a lot of time learning how to do it. And it's, you know, I've personally spent all day trying to figure out how to fix one line of code, right? Like, or how to like even just trying to understand the documentation on one function within one line of code. It's very hard, and you are seldom invited to zoom out and say, what is the context of my work? What is the purpose of this? And am I building something in a world that I want? I mean, like, the the concept of work, we've discussed that here too, but like the concept of work is challenging because most people spend all of their work in busyness without ever saying, like, this thing that I'm spending the majority of my energy on, do I care what it does? Like, it makes me money. Is that what I'm looking for? And this data together space, it's that invitation. It says, hey, whatever it is you're doing, have you thought about it? Like, have you thought about it on a grand scale? Have you looked at what it's for in a long time? And it's an invitation to see maybe ideas that nobody ever showed to you because you were a code monkey, or maybe it's, you know, you actually getting to talk to technologists about the thing you've been fighting for, like on the streets for years, and you've just never, like, you know, maybe you protested Google or Facebook like with a picket sign, but you probably never talked to the engineer and said, hey, like, why didn't you do this thing better? And this is the kind of space, I want it to be the kind of space where that can happen, where you can say, hey, like, you know, you really can't make that decision because it'll impact my life. And I need you to know that, like, yeah. And I think that in general, intersectionality of like backgrounds, when they can be focused productively on a topic, can be really, really fruitful for everyone involved, just because it's often new for each person in some way.
Yeah, I feel like there's two, this is like a non-answer. I'm just gonna like jump on what Kelsey said, but I think there's two things in there which really resonated. The first one is this idea of like needing ideas for the moment almost. It's like, I think it's an under acknowledge, like I think sometimes we've under resourced certain like professions. I don't think it always has to be professionalized, but certain forms of like production with like all of the ideas that I think could make it, like that could give them the space for things to be better. So it's like a lot of work for folks who are in those spaces to like search out and then engage with those ideas. I mean, I think you see that in like I don't know, like I think people do that with technology. And I think people do that whether they identify as a technologist or an artist or a researcher. But I do feel like there is like a bit of a, it's like it's tough work. Like it's taken up by an individual in some cases, or like they have to build that community around them to do that work. But like my dream would be that there is that like way that, yeah, like kind of like those ideas are in some ways like more ready to hand. And if not your hand, there's like a way that we can like share idea, like hand off ideas to each other at the right moment, you know, when they're like, it's a good time. But also the other part of it, which I think is super important too, is like that it's not really like a one-sided, like I don't want to, I mean, I'm nervous that maybe I frame things in such a way where I'm like, oh, only the technologists have to learn from like people who are like really theoretical or people who are activists. I actually think that like concretely having to grapple with why how things are built is actually like so important to thinking about how to build them better. And so there's that like it's like actually that like putting into practice moment, which I think actually is a question for Data Together, is like if we're not doing the putting into practice in Data Together now, it's like how do we support people as they take things back to their own place where they're putting it into practice. I feel like Edgy maybe has like a good conduit because of the way that we've like facilitated that group. But if the rest of the people coming into this space are maybe a little more distributed, like for sorry, for a lack of a better term, like for me, for example, I'm not active in Edgy. Like I'm a happy alum, but I'm not actually like in doing that kind of day-to-day project work. It's like thinking about how to connect it back into the stuff I do. I think is maybe a question, because I think that actually is a way to keep this feeling resonant and or like kind of like having that importance be realized more broadly.
I could go deeper, but I won't because we won't have time for the other thing. So this is really good. There's a lot here. Yeah, and there's lots of different directions that we could go. We could go into another call where we do something called future present, where we sketch out, where you guys sketch out a scenario for what that future ideal utopian state looks like. And then we create a fun breakout group role play activity around that that gets everybody feeling as if they exist in that future state, and they're asking the elders who made that future state happen how they did that. And then from that you get a whole conversation around, oh wow, like it felt really possible, you know, but then also a sense of like, and we talked about tangible ways that we achieved that. So there's an interesting exercise there that could happen with like more people. And right now, why don't we just like slow things down and get out of a talking space together, and just after kind of all of that flurry of ideas that were there, just kind of ground them a bit. And this exercise is super simple for that. And it's only for us individually, so we don't share any of this unless we really want to. But you have to have a pen and a piece of paper to do it. So I need to actually go and grab that myself. So I'll be right back. Give me 1 minute. Okay. So I'm going to set my timer for a couple minutes here. And this is really simple instruction to start us out. We're just going to take our piece of paper and our pencil or pen, and I want you to draw just like quadrants. So like that and like that, right? And we're going to start in the middle, the very center. And for the next 2 minutes, I want you to slowly draw a spiral as tight as you can. So like try to keep it as tight as possible and slowly spiral out. We're just going to spend 2 minutes quietly doing that. Starting now. Okay. So now for each quadrant that we have there, we're just going to take a few minutes for each one to respond to the 4 questions that we have. I'll just pop them into chat as I say them out. And our first one is, my body is telling me. So these are actually, they are not questions, they're sentences that you complete. My body is telling me. I'll give us a couple minutes for each of these. Okay, so the next question here that we're going to use together, or sorry, sentence that we're going to complete together. When I listen, the quiet voice is saying, Okay. Our next one here. If we do nothing, the worst thing that can happen for us is. Okay. And our last question. When all is said and done, I want. When all is said and done, I want. Okay. So
Just echoing what Kelsey said in chat, thanks for this conversation. It wound up being kind of a rich one, but I feel like also, Stefan, you stepped back a little bit, and I feel like I'm curious your thoughts. So I'm really excited about this idea of thinking about another version of data together.
my thoughts in relationship to the conversation that you guys were having, you know, I feel like I'm always trying to identify projects of commoning that I want to contribute. I want to contribute to in some way, and the Data Together project is one of those. I think that's very interesting to me because it speaks to a different way that we can be designing things in the future, these spaces that we interact with online. And so that's exciting to me. And so I feel energized by a lot of the purpose that you guys have brought to this conversation. And I think that, you know, I'd be more than happy to help in that kind of exploratory discovery process with yourselves and with others to like define what Data Together looks like in 2021.
I have a Slack reminder that keeps popping up that says that we're supposed to have a fourth quarter Data Together meeting to plan our next projects and next year. And I don't want to just be indebted to it, but I'm wondering if I could find a good space to get people to say, yes, I really will be there. And we could bring together like the people who I know care about this space and just don't always have the time to come. And like have them move through this sort of exercise. Or I know, Stephen, you've got like so many beautiful microstructures for facilitating a group through this sort of thing. I would love if you wanted to take on part of that process of helping us figure out what we are. I know, Don, the reading group started because people were trying to identify what exactly are Data Together's principles. What is this space? And
So long ago.
it's still that.
Yeah, I like Kelsey. I like that idea of like maybe having that planning call be a space to have some bit of this, but then yeah, the question of like how to. I'm so nervous to ask people to do anything right now, just because of like the world we're in. So, how to do that? That's the tricky part.
The invitation is everything. The invitation is where it becomes something or doesn't, given the world we live in right now. And I would say like you have within this chat log here, you have the words and the ideas that you can use for that invitation. And they might have, I feel like the outcome of tonight and whatever, how many days after tonight, there will be a different resonance to the words depending on what happens there and that wider polity. And I think both outcomes are problematic in various hues. I worry that we rest on our laurels, if and so I think that with with the words that you guys have expressed here today and like thought through out loud with me, you have like a really good start for an invitation that I think would, you know, in the context of what's happening over the next few weeks, could really like be appealing to lots of people. And I'd be happy to like craft elements of that invitation. But I feel like because I don't have a close tie to the source of Data Together and what it's all about, it will probably be pointless, you know. But I can certainly contribute ideas about, you know, what we do if people like the invitation. I can contribute lots of ideas there about what we can do. So more than happy to like, you know, after you've issued the invitation and it sounds like people like it, I'm more than happy to help. Like, okay, what should that like 2 hour chunk of time be?
Yeah, I also similarly feel hesitant to be like, I don't think I think was around at the beginning, but like also am not present in a lot of the ways that would help be like I'm not the right voice to extend an invitation, you know, and or I'm not. I just feel like I'm not aware of the nuances of like how where things are at between all the different groups and like how this can be a productive space for edgy. Um, so
Would
it's
you be
like I
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
would you be a helpful editor though, Dawn?
Yeah, sure, and I'm happy to like I don't know add some oomph. But yeah, like if you want someone to just like do some word vomit, I'm really good at that.
Yeah.
I can copy edit.
Yeah,
I'm
I can
wondering,
edit
yeah.
too. I should be clear. I
The,
am able to.
thank you guys. One of the things that I've been kind of waiting for with like the reason I have that Slack reminder just still snoozed is I'm waiting for it to not feel like, oh no, another thing.
Yeah.
And that might be a while, like it might be until next year. But I think that that moment will happen. And I'm hoping that if that happens for me, it might be happening for other people, where either our world gets a little easier to live in or we get more used to the world that we're in, um, enough that we know how to work with it. Like, I don't want to extend an invitation into a space where people will feel obliged to say yes. Um, and so that's kind of
Yeah.
my biggest concern.
I think that like the timing is good. Like I think there's so many unknowns. Like tonight plus the next X number of weeks. Like I actually think it's kind of unclear how many weeks it'll be. Um, but there is going to be some galvanizing in one direction or another. I guess like politically, and that in a way that really will influence edgy. Um,
Yeah.
so one of the key like holders of this space. But that also like with the Filecoin launch and some other things, like I just feel like there's like maybe yeah, like that in a few weeks there you'll have a better sense of that timing of like
Yeah.
when that conversation could happen.
One thing
Um,
I really like about this Data Together space is that we do move slow and we're okay with that. Where like edgy might need to be reactive, but Data Together is a bigger conceptual space and it's okay to do. Um, yeah, I don't want to hold over too much longer
Well,
because we're already 4 over, but
we can call it. I mean, it feels pretty
yeah.
good. I feel like there's like a good sense of understanding like ripeness around this, you know? And yeah, I look forward to being part of that slow build, and I'm more than happy to help with some ideas about how we can like generatively collaborate when we get more people in that setting. So count me in from that angle for sure.
yeah, and me too. And I think also if it's next year, I think that's fine. I feel like just being like, oh, that can be a 2021 thing is like already a thing I've said to myself many times this like last 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, that sounds lovely. Well, thanks you two. I know this wasn't the polity discussion you were intending. Um, but I feel like I have a good sense of the data together polity here. So this was really helpful.
That's it. That's exactly it. There you go. Okay, I'm gonna make
Yeah.
sure that I've saved this file. Okay.
Thank you.
And I'll share it with you, Kelsey. And
Thank you. Well,
Yeah,
see you
thank
guys
you. It
around.
was such a great conversation. Hope you both have a
Yeah.
good rest of your evening / late afternoon. I don't know. Can I
Yeah,
call it that?
Yeah.
something like that. All right.
Later
Bye,
noon.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.